Liddy is just so cute. The voice becomes clear as the door opens, and at that name coming from Quimby's mouth, I froze. I wondered who it could be, but hearing that name confirmed it. The woman's voice was indeed my sister Liddy's. Quimby foolishly kept calling Liddy's name over and over. Shivering, I snapped to my senses. I realized I had to capture this scene on video. So, I firmly recorded the evidence on my smartphone and quietly left the spot. After a while, the two of them came out of the bedroom. Seeing me, they turned pale, and I said, "That's right, I sent the video of you two to Gabriel. Anyway, let's discuss what to do next among the four of us soon." At those words, Liddy's face turned even paler. "What? What do you mean?" "Just what it sounds like. I've got the video as evidence." "What have you done?" As I held up my smartphone, my sister became utterly frantic, and then she lunged at me. "My name is Linny, a 45-year-old housewife. I have twin boys who are in the 6th grade of elementary school. The kids are twins. I've heard that twins run in families, and indeed, I am a twin myself. I have a twin sister named Liddy. Being identical twins, we never really felt like sisters. Rather, we were more like rivals. Even if we weren't twins, it might have been the same, but I grew up always being compared to Liddy. Before long, I harbored a strong complex towards Liddy, and she, in turn, placed utmost importance on surpassing me. Liddy was always the cute and affable child. On the other hand, I was always the shy and reserved one. And because I was also a bit of an introvert, everyone's attention naturally gravitated towards Liddy whenever we met someone new. Even though we were rivals, I deeply adored Liddy. Her ever-smiling face and popularity were something I aspired to. But it seems Liddy didn't feel the same way. We used to play together a lot when we were in elementary school, but I was always stuck with the roles nobody wanted. "Linny is it!" When nobody wanted to be it in a game of tag, I was always the one forced into the role. Even when one of our friends suggested deciding by rock, paper, scissors, Liddy would pressure me, saying, "You want to do it, right, Linny?" Not wanting to be disliked by Liddy or left out, I had no choice but to agree. Liddy's manipulative behavior wasn't just limited to playtime. It was in 6th grade. We were deciding roles for a school play. We were going to perform Snow White, and I, not being much of an actress, hoped to be the narrator. But I caught a cold and had to miss school on the day of role assignments. "Linny wants to be the narrator. I'll tell the teacher for you." Liddy said she'd pass on my wishes, so I trusted her and felt relieved. However, when I returned to school after recovering, I was shocked to find out I had been cast as the lead role. "Why am I the lead?" I asked a friend in disbelief, and then came the unbelievable reply. "Liddy said you wanted to be the lead." "What? I didn't say that." "But it's already been decided." It seems that as we were entering puberty, no one wanted to take on the potentially embarrassing lead role of Snow White. So I, the quiet girl who was absent, was chosen. The teacher found it odd that I, usually so reserved, had expressed a desire to take the lead role. Did Linny really say that? The teacher had even checked with Liddy. "Truly, she wants to, but she's too shy to volunteer. Please, let this be an opportunity for Linny to shine." But Liddy recommended me as if it was all in my best interest. I cried, insisting I couldn't do it, and didn't want to. However, everyone else's roles had already been assigned. Chastised by teachers and parents alike, I somehow managed to pull through. Thanks to that effort, the play was a huge success. Teachers, parents, and friends all praised me. But amidst all this, only Liddy looked on displeased. Anyone could have done that. Getting all that praise for such a little thing is just silly. And so she began to openly resent me. That was the moment I truly felt Liddy's dislike. After that, she stopped inviting me to play. At first, it was painful, but once I realized I was no longer being forced into unpleasant roles, I made other friends and started enjoying myself. In middle school, many didn't even know Liddy and I were twins. We had become so distant, hardly speaking at school, and didn't look alike at all. We requested not to be in the same class, and I was enjoying my own life. But then, one day, as I was studying for high school entrance exams, Liddy approached me. Studying? Have you decided which high school you're applying to? Yeah, thinking of going for A high school. A high school was the newest and closest school to our house, boasting a competitive entrance difficulty. I had been working hard for 3 years because I really wanted to get into that school. But Liddy, unaware of my efforts, laughed when she heard my choice of high school. A high school? You've gotta be kidding, right? Why don't you just go to B high school with me? It sounds like you wouldn't even need to study much for that. Liddy always managed to bend me to her will, but I didn't want her dictating my choice of high school too. For the first time, I stood up to her. I've decided to go to A high school. You don't know if it's impossible for me. If you don't want to study, that's fine, but don't get in my way. I turned away from her and went back to my textbook. What? That tone to your older sister? Angered by my response, Liddy grabbed my textbook and threw it on the floor. What are you doing? Even if you study, it's a waste, you know. You're destined to be my slave and go to B high school together. That day, we ended up in a physical fight. Our parents came running when they heard the commotion and pulled us apart. But by then, my textbook was torn to pieces. But more than that, my heart was shattered by hearing Liddy's true feelings about me. To Liddy, I was just a convenient target for all the unpleasant things. Realizing that Liddy saw me as her slave was a clear awakening, but I didn't give up on studying. Fortunately, my parents contacted the school for me, and I got a new textbook. With my parents' support, Liddy no longer interfered with my studies, and I was able to dedicate myself to them and successfully got into my chosen school. As she had initially declared, Liddy barely studied for the exams and went on to B high school. Thus, we went to different high schools, pursued our education at different universities, and eventually started our careers. As an adult, I began living on my own. And that's when I met a man. He was my husband, Quimby. Quimby and I were hired at the same time and felt a closeness because we were from the same area. When he asked me out, I felt like I was dreaming. I actually like you, Linny. I'd be happy if you'd go out with me. Hearing those words made me incredibly happy. I had feelings for Quimby too, but I had never had the courage to admit such feelings openly. I wasn't pretty like Liddy, and having had almost no experience with love during my school days, I could hardly believe he felt the same way about me. I'd be happy to. Thank you. Being in a relationship for the first time made me feel overjoyed. Since we started dating, I've been doing my best to make him happy, cooking meals and preparing lunch boxes for him. Quimby started visiting my apartment more often, and we began a life almost like we were living together. Linny, I'll cook dinner tonight. But it wasn't just me doing things for him. Quimby was also very cooperative with household chores. Doing chores together was fun, and I began to think we could make a good married couple. 3 years into our relationship, we decided to get married. I was overjoyed and very happy about it, but there was one thing that worried me. You're a twin, right? I'd like to meet your sister. Quimby brought it up. During the 3 years we were dating, I had told him that I have a twin sister, but I had never introduced him to Liddy. I hadn't even told her about having a boyfriend. Since that big fight in middle school, there had been a deep rift between us. Yeah, that's right. But if we were getting married, it was inevitable that Liddy and Quimby would meet. The thought of how Liddy might scorn us made me anxious, but I knew I had to introduce them at some point. What? Married? Since when? And when I finally called Liddy, after a long time, she seemed surprised by my news and raised her voice. I had told my parents, but it seems Liddy hadn't heard about it yet. She sounded like this was news to her. Yeah, and I want to introduce Liddy to the man I'm going to marry. I'm busy, you know. Well, if you insist, I guess I could meet him. Liddy was as condescending as ever, so I asked her to make some time for us. Liddy hadn't changed since we were kids. I figured I had to be the adult and humble myself. We went back home to meet Liddy on her day off. Quimby suggested we all have a meal together with our parents, so we arranged to meet at a restaurant. And then, on the day we went to the restaurant, but even when the time came, Liddy didn't show up. Liddy's late. I thought she said she'd be on time. Sorry, Quimby. Don't worry about it. She'll show up eventually. Let's just wait a bit longer. Both my parents and I felt bad for keeping Quimby waiting. 15 minutes past the scheduled time, Liddy showed up in a flashy dress. Sorry, did you wait? We did. What's with the outfit? Well, it's kind of like a meet and greet, right? Thought I should dress up. I couldn't help but be exasperated by her. Not just me, but our parents just gave a wry smile. If she knew it was a meet and greet, I wish she hadn't been late without even messaging. Especially not for the sake of getting dressed up. Seemed immature for an adult. But wanting to keep the peace, I swallowed my words. We introduced Liddy and Quimby to each other. Wow, Linny, you've snagged a good-looking one. Working at the same place means he must be earning well. Liddy made several rude remarks to Quimby on their first meeting. What do you do in your free time? With Linny? No, before you started dating Linny. She grilled Quimby like it was a speed dating session. Despite our parents' attempts to stop her, Liddy kept going, saying, It's fine, I want to know what kind of man Linny's husband will be. Quimby was gracious, saying, Don't worry about it, and entertained Liddy throughout. By the end of the meal, I was exhausted and sighing. However, it didn't end there. Liddy's quite the character, huh? Opposite of Linny. I always say we're the least alike twins ever. When I responded with a forced smile, Quimby said, Maybe you should take a leaf out of Liddy's book. She's always smiling, good at conversation, and cute. If I'd met her first. I was shocked at what he meant. I had told him about my discomfort with Liddy. To hear him say this, knowing that, was deeply shocking. Why don't you marry Liddy then? She even said you were handsome. When I snapped back like that, he hurriedly apologized. Sorry, it was just a joke. I'm glad I met Linny, and I don't have any special feelings for Liddy. Then you shouldn't say things that praise Liddy and put me down. It was a joke! Quimby apologized like that. I was shocked, but I wasn't going to call off our engagement over something like this. I just hoped he understood. Right after that, he said, But Liddy is a nice girl. It's not good to be jealous of your sister. Let's all get along as a family now. We're adults. Things are different than they were. I had my reservations, but I knew our parents wanted Linny and me to get along, but I wanted Quimby to be on my side. Why was he trying to bring me and Liddy closer? But it's not like we'd be interacting much anyway. Arguing seemed too troublesome, so I just nodded along to Quimby's words. A few days later, I got a message from Liddy. Isn't Quimby too good for you? Should I take him off your hands? I was chilled by her message. What are you talking about? I replied instinctively, and she called immediately. Just what I said. It's unbelievable someone as dull as Linny will get married before me. Liddy insulted me over the phone and laughed. He's high-earning and well-educated. Why not hand him over to me? We're twins. We've always shared everything. Don't say stupid things. I yelled back at Liddy. I couldn't stand Quimby being treated like an object, nor the notion that we had always shared everything. That's ridiculous. I was always just someone for Liddy to dump the things she didn't want on. That night, I told Quimby about this, warning him to be careful around Liddy. But Quimby seemed to take it lightly, laughing off my words. It's nice to be liked that much. Don't worry, Liddy's not serious. It's not funny. You don't know what Liddy might do. Do you doubt my feelings? It's okay because I said it's okay. Despite him being such a wonderful person, I felt like Quimby had changed after meeting Liddy. Quimby would affirm everything when it came to Liddy, just because she's my sister. Other than that, he was the same wonderful partner as always, but I was dissatisfied with how he changed whenever Liddy was involved. Don't worry so much. But as Quimby said, if he himself didn't sway, there was nothing Liddy could do. Feeling unsettled by her words was proof I hadn't fully trusted Quimby. So, I was admonished. Indeed, he was right. I decided to trust Quimby and ignore Liddy's words. Even afterward, Liddy sent me spiteful messages, but I never replied. Fortunately, Liddy didn't interfere with us, and I prayed we could become wonderful sisters while leading a happy married life. Years went by. After I turned 40, my parents told me that Liddy had gotten married. By then, I had blocked her and wasn't in contact. Although we occasionally saw each other at our parents' home, Liddy would insult me. Being nearly 40 and still unmarried, Liddy had become resentful towards me, and it seemed she was avoiding me as well. I thought Liddy, being quite picky, wouldn't marry, but I was genuinely glad for her when I heard she had found someone. I realized how terrible I had been when Liddy got married, only after I got married myself. Moreover, through my parents, Liddy apologized to me. After that, we started communicating again. Indeed, Liddy had changed, becoming much calmer than before. It was as if she had returned to the Liddy I once loved. I never thought the day would come when Liddy and I could laugh together again, so I was very happy. Liddy even introduced me to her husband. He was about 5 years our senior, named Gabriel. He seemed to care for Liddy deeply, which reassured me. Having both married, Liddy and I became closer. Our parents were very happy to see us getting along. I wanted to make up for the time we had spent apart. Then, a few years later, something happened. I became ill at work and had to leave early. I wanted to inform Quimby, but he was out on business, so I left a message with a colleague. I went straight home. Upon entering the house, I immediately sensed something was off. It felt like there was someone inside, even though the house was supposed to be empty. Could it be a burglar? That thought flashed through my mind as I quietly entered. Listening closely, I could hear noises and voices coming from the bedroom. As I stood silently in front of the bedroom, I recognized Quimby's voice coming from inside, but I couldn't bring myself to speak up. The nature of his voice drained the blood from my face. It was unmistakably the sound of an intimate moment. The creaking of the bed confirmed my fears. I didn't need to see inside to know what was happening, and my hands trembled. However, if Quimby was cheating, I had to catch him in the act. With that thought, I carefully opened the door with my smartphone in hand, ready to record. What I saw inside the bedroom was even more shocking. Liddy is really cute, isn't she? The voice became clearer as the door opened. Hearing Quimby say her name, I froze. Now that he mentioned it, the female's voice was indeed Liddy's. Quimby kept foolishly repeating Liddy's name. Trembling, I recorded the scene and quietly left. I sat in the dining area in shock for a while. I was supposed to be home early due to feeling unwell, but that shock made me forget my illness. Staring blankly at my phone, I just waited for this nightmare to end. Then, a few minutes later, the bedroom door opened. "I'll head back to work now, so lock up," said a voice. "Okay. It'd be nice if we could live together soon." Hearing this, I hurriedly stood up. Noticing the noise, Quimby and Liddy saw me in the hallway. "Linny, why are you here?" Quimby exclaimed, turning pale. "Why? This is my house, right? But why is Liddy here? Aren't you both supposed to be at work?" Liddy looked away for a moment, but then smirked defiantly. "Why do you think? You wanted it from my own mouth, didn't you?" "Liddy!" Quimby tried to stop her, but Liddy wouldn't be silenced. "I've always hated how you look down on me. Happiness and Quimby don't suit you. I'll take everything." With that, Liddy declared. I just smiled at her words. "Is that so? Then I'll give you Quimby." Liddy, but don't think you can take my happiness." Liddy seemed annoyed by my retort, glaring at me. To that, I continued, addressing her directly. "Yeah, I sent the video to Gabriel. Let's discuss this as a group of 4 sometime soon." Liddy's face turned pale instantly. "What do you mean?" "Just what I said. If you want Quimby, Gabriel should know about this, shouldn't he?" What have you done? Liddy lunged at me. Liddy, calm down! How can I calm down? Quimby tried to stop her, but Liddy was beyond reason. Just then, the smartphone inside Liddy's bag rang. At that sound, Liddy froze in place. Looks like Gabriel's calling, isn't it? Liddy, pale-faced, hesitantly looked at her bag, but there was no sign of her answering the call. In the silent room, only the sound of the phone echoed. After a while, it stopped ringing, and then my phone rang. See? Since Liddy didn't answer, now he's calling me. Liddy, I'm truly sorry. Please forgive Liddy. Can you somehow cover for her with Gabriel? If not, Liddy will lose everything. Quimby started making statements as if to protect Liddy. Liddy, standing next to him, began to sob bitterly, as if she were the tragic heroine. What Quimby said made sense. Actually, Gabriel is not only Liddy's husband, but also the president of the company where she works. If Gabriel learns about Liddy's infidelity, divorce talks might start, and she might not be able to continue working at his company, especially now, during work hours. There's no room for sympathy, though it seems harsh. She did this knowing full well she could lose everything? I can't possibly cover for her. I said that. That's too harsh. Quimby, as usual, tried to defend Liddy. His words infuriated me, and I glared at Quimby. Worried about her? Thinking Liddy is the only one who's going to lose her family and job is a huge mistake. At my shout, Quimby flinched, then started sweating profusely. It was as if he suddenly came to his senses, starting to break out in a cold sweat. He must have understood the meaning of my words. Just so you know, I've also sent the video to the company's main email address, including your department and name. What have you done? By then, Gabriel's call had ended. Quimby and Liddy stood frozen with a look of despair. After kicking them out, I called Gabriel. Sorry to disturb you at work. It's about the video, right? Yes. It involves Quimby, doesn't it? Yes. I replied to Gabriel's gentle voice. I'm sorry for asking this of you. He said that. Actually, Gabriel had consulted me because he felt something was off with Liddy. It might have been plausible for the old Liddy, but the current Liddy truly loved Gabriel. I didn't think she would cheat, and I had conveyed as much to Gabriel. But just in case, he had asked me to gather evidence if Liddy did something questionable. That's why I think I was able to film calmly. Please, don't apologize. I'm glad I could capture evidence of Quimby's infidelity. If you hadn't asked me, I probably wouldn't have thought to do so calmly. I told Gabriel. It would be a lie to say I wasn't shocked. It's shocking enough to discover an affair, let alone with one's own sister. I had every right to be angry. My sons will be home soon, so let's talk another time. I told Gabriel and hung up. Tears flowed endlessly, but for my sons and for my own future, I knew I had to be strong. That day, I went about my usual routines, and when the kids had settled down for the night, Quimby came home. Were you with Liddy? I asked him, and Quimby, clearly in a bad mood, snapped back at me. I got called into HR because of you. The decision on my punishment will come later. What are you going to do about this? The way Quimby turned the blame on me, making me out to be the villain despite his actions, made me almost laugh. Crying over such a man was a waste of time. There's nothing to be done. Do as you please. You understand the situation, right? If we divorce, I'm taking the kids. Still want a divorce? His attempt to use our sons as leverage was pathetic, and I told him so. What are you talking about? You think you'll get custody after likely losing your job? Divorce is a foregone conclusion. Stop being ridiculous. Quimby had nothing to say. Of course. Getting caught in adultery during work hours? Dismissal seemed inevitable. Was he still so clueless about the gravity of his actions? If that's the case, then he's incredibly foolish. I'll be leaving tomorrow. Wait a minute. Can't we consider starting over? Can't you forgive just one affair? Quimby, now taking a submissive stance, began apologizing to the assertive me. One time? I asked back. According to Gabriel, Liddy's behavior had been odd for several months. Given Gabriel's job involves mostly being out for sales, there's a good chance she might have been returning home like this. Just one? Quimby responded weakly to my question, his eyes darting around. From the lack of confidence in his answer, it was clear it wasn't just once. It felt ridiculous to pursue it any further, so I dropped the subject. The next day, I told my sons about Quimby's infidelity. They are in 6th grade now, old enough to understand that hurting and betraying others is wrong. I apologized for having such a conversation at this sensitive time in their lives, and they said they wanted to talk it over alone and went to their room. After just a few minutes, they came out with their bags packed and said, "We're on your side, Mom." I couldn't help but cry. The boys laughed and comforted me as I apologized again. Then we went back to my parents' house. My parents were speechless when they heard about Liddy and Quimby's actions. Despite being happy that we had become close as sisters again, I felt sorry, but Mom apologized to me, crying, "Liddy hasn't changed after all. I'm sorry for always making you endure her." "Cut ties with both Liddy and Quimby. We will keep our distance from Liddy to the bare minimum," Dad said, and I felt relieved. From that day, I started commuting to work from my parents' home. Quimby, perhaps on suspension, didn't come to the office but called me multiple times instead. Ignoring him as I didn't have time to deal with it, he began to send messages day and night. "I love you, Linny. Let's live happily as a family of 4 again." I was insane. I was just deceived by that woman. "I don't know how to live without you, Linny." Perhaps these were what you'd call Romeo emails. I was almost fooled for a moment, but thanks to my sons laughing uproariously at those messages, I realized how ridiculous they were. However, I couldn't ignore him forever. Eventually, I had to meet him to sign the divorce papers. I made plans to meet Quimby at a cafe on my day off. Choosing to meet at a cafe instead of going home was Gabriel's advice. He said that being in a public place would help keep the conversation calm. When Gabriel and Liddy arrived at the cafe together, Liddy had become so thin in just a few days. She looked like a different person. She must have fallen out of favor with Gabriel. Serves her right. Now, both Liddy and Quimby, please sign the divorce papers. It seemed Liddy was also reluctant to divorce. To the two hesitating to sign, Quimby said, "It's a misunderstanding, Gabriel. It's your choice to divorce, but we won't." "Are you still saying that? My sons and I no longer consider you family," I retorted. I addressed Quimby's desperate attempts. Gabriel sighed deeply and said, "You could go to court, but it's clear you'll lose, considering the alimony and legal fees for the divorce trial. Can you afford it?" "Alimony for the divorce trial? Of course. You both betrayed your families. Liddy to me and Linny. Quimby, you'll have to pay us a proper settlement in the divorce trial." Liddy started trembling silently. Her silence and weight loss now made sense. "What am I supposed to do? I might be fired. How can I pay?" Quimby began to argue, pale-faced. "You did this to yourself. Besides, you owe child support for both kids. Right, Liddy?" At my words, Liddy flinched. "You wanted to live together, right? You're welcome to have the house." I laughed loudly. "And don't forget the mortgage payments!" Quimby was taken aback, probably having forgotten about the mortgage. Both sat sweating, pale, and silent in front of the divorce papers. Later, Gabriel introduced me to a lawyer, and I managed to claim alimony and legal fees, and finalized the divorce. Quimby, who had resisted divorce so much, proposed to Liddy immediately after our divorce was finalized. I knew he had liked Liddy from the start. When did their affair turn serious? Hearing this, I felt nothing but disdain. Meanwhile, Liddy, who had genuinely loved Gabriel, was abandoned, and eventually lost her job too. Why did she end up with Quimby, despite loving Gabriel so much? Remaining puzzled, I asked Gabriel about it. He hesitated before revealing. Actually, she started complaining about you a few months ago. Really? Complaining about how you, who were useless, got married and even have kids? It's extravagant, he explained. Could it really be because of that? I wondered. But considering Liddy's personality, it wasn't impossible. Yet, the thought that she went to such lengths just to set me up was horrifying. It was because I thought you might be in danger that I consulted Linny, but I never imagined it would lead to this with Quimby. I'm truly sorry, Gabriel said apologetically. It's okay, it's over now. And Quimby is to blame for taking up Liddy's invitation as well. That concluded our conversation. Gabriel and I agreed to keep in touch for updates on the divorce compensation and legal consultations. According to him, the two burdened with a substantial amount of divorce compensation ended up marrying and living together. Liddy was abandoned by her parents and had nowhere else to go. It seemed she reluctantly accepted Quimby's proposal because she had no family left. From what the lawyer told me, Liddy couldn't accept that she ended up divorcing Gabriel and marrying Quimby, whom she didn't love, because of me. The lawyer mentioned getting hurled with abusive language every time he called her. While I felt sorry for the lawyer, he continued to support me firmly, perhaps because of Gabriel's presence, and I couldn't be more grateful. For a while, we'll still have to make calls to demand the divorce compensation, and it seems I'll continue to rely on their support. 5 years passed. The divorce compensation and child support were being paid on time, and my emotional wounds had largely healed. One day, after a long period of calm, the lawyer contacted me. Liddy says she has something to talk to you about. I refused. Knowing her, it would likely end up with her using me as a verbal punching bag for stress relief. I decided never to trust or forgive Liddy again, and asked the lawyer to convey my refusal. However, Liddy insisted it was urgent, and Quimby also requested a meeting on her behalf. Given their persistence, I reluctantly agreed. However, lacking the courage to meet them alone, I contacted Gabriel, feeling somewhat guilty for doing so after such a long time. He gladly agreed to accompany me, and so I met with them after a long while. Quimby and Liddy were sitting at the cafe with a solemn demeanor. When Liddy saw my face, she looked slightly relieved. "What's this about? Why did you call me here?" I asked, and Liddy said, "Actually, I've developed renal failure and need to undergo dialysis." I was taken aback. "It's your fault!" "No, both of your faults, that Liddy ended up like this. She couldn't sleep without drinking alcohol, and yet because of the divorce settlement payments, she had to work. Your actions have destroyed her health." Quimby angrily blamed us, but I thought it was their own doing. Gabriel seemed to agree, as he sighed and looked exasperated. "So what? I'm not reducing or refunding the divorce settlement. Be thankful I agreed to installments." I stood firm, and Liddy, crying, lowered her head. "I'll pay the divorce settlement. Please, I'm begging you. Give me a kidney." "What?" I exclaimed loudly at her outrageous request. "What are you talking about? There's no way I give it to you." When I refused, Quimby said, "You were born with a twin with Liddy for this reason. You have a duty to help her." "What are you talking about? Who has been pushing all the unpleasant things onto me? Did Liddy ever help me once in such situations?" "Don't talk about trivial matters. Liddy's life is at stake here," Quimby angrily retorted. Liddy began to cry and plead, apologizing. Quimby insulted me as heartless, pressuring me for the transplant as if threatening. At that moment, feeling as though I was being blamed, Gabriel spoke up. "If she needs dialysis, then undergo dialysis. Do you understand how tough dialysis is? And do you understand how difficult a transplant is? Why should she risk her life for Liddy? Their words left them speechless. I felt relieved with Gabriel's support and caught my breath. Moreover, Liddy, you've repeatedly called Linny useless. Isn't it too convenient to ask for help only when you're in trouble? But that's... Liddy, you've destroyed Linny's happy life. Linny has no obligation to save your life. Liddy broke down crying, and Quimby was at a loss for words. Both of them must have thought that I would surely give them a kidney. If I had been alone, I might have been persuaded. Once again, Gabriel saved me. Take care then. Oh, and don't forget the transfer for this month's payment. With that, I got up and left. Whether I'm called heartless or a devil, I cannot forgive them both. I don't know what kind of life they will lead from now on, but I hope they never forget what they did and reflect on it. It seems Quimby and Liddy were both working part-time to make ends meet, but now that Liddy can no longer work properly, their financial situation is dire. But that's their karma. Everything is the result of their actions. Their atonement won't end until they've paid the compensation ordered in the divorce settlement. I continue to live happily with my parents and sons. My parents no longer even mention Liddy's name. However, it seems they are happy to see the twins getting along well. It's comforting to see a bond between my sons that Liddy and I never had. I continue to keep in touch with Gabriel frequently. He's a genuinely good person, always thoughtful and considerate. It appears he has developed feelings for me, but I'm not ready to reciprocate them at this time. I don't want to cause any more upset for my sons. But in a few years, when they come of age, I hope to have the chance to think about my own happiness again.
Sorry for the bother. The thing is, he began. The moment I learned the truth, I was filled with surprise, gratitude toward my father-in-law, and a sense of liberation. My name is Charlotte. Born in April, surrounded by the gentle scent of blossoming flowers, as my name suggests. Since then, 45 years have passed. I've devoted my life to my family as a wife and a mother, cherishing each day. But problems arose outside of my family life. I used to spend joyful times with my family alone. I met my husband Joseph at a club in college. We hit it off, started dating, and eventually got married. We have a son, but he's working in the city as a professional, so he only returns home once every 6 months. Ever since it became just the two of us, Joseph and I looked forward to revisiting places we went when we first dated. How about going to Six Flags tomorrow on our day off? Now here's the question. What did Charlotte do 23 years ago at that amusement park? Did I do something? Caught off guard by Joseph's sudden question, my mind raced to remember. Something from that long ago? Oh, I remember. After riding the teacups, I got dizzy and fell into a nearby pond. That's correct. I was so embarrassed I wanted to pretend I didn't know you. How mean! Why did you let go of my hand then? Laughing about my embarrassing moments like this has become a treasured pastime. Even when it's just the two of us at home, the atmosphere never darkens. We lived a happy life. Due to Joseph's shift work, there were days we hardly saw each other. But since I adjusted my work to match his schedule, I rarely felt lonely. However, then a major event that would drastically affect our lives happened. Our father-in-law was diagnosed with terminal pancreatic cancer. Surgery was difficult, and the 5-year survival rate was less than 2%. A dire illness. Both Joseph and I were filled with such hatred, our hands clenched into fists. When a loved one suddenly falls ill, you wonder what you can do. What's the best course of action? And your mind goes blank. Joseph has a sister living in the neighboring town, but she doesn't know about this yet. Deciding to inform her soon, Joseph picked up his smartphone and made a call. After 7 rings, a loud, shrill voice echoed through the receiver. Why are you calling now of all times? I'm busy preparing dinner. We have something important to talk about. We'll come over tomorrow evening. Despite her complaints about the sudden development, this wasn't the time to worry about such things. After conveying the necessary information, Joseph hung up. Joseph normally didn't pay much mind to his free-spirited sister-in-law, who rarely shows up at family gatherings and doesn't quite mesh well with his personality. But this time, things were different. The next day, we hastily took the day off and headed to her house. When we rang the doorbell, her husband, not the friendliest of individuals, was the first to answer. He opened the door without changing his expression and looked at us with an intimidating stare, not a pleasant feeling. In the living room, she cast a cold glance at us. Despite not having seen each other for 6 months, she treated us worse than strangers. Amidst this, Joseph fixed his intense gaze on her. Then, as he informed her about their father's illness, she uttered unbelievable words from her mouth. "So what? You came all the way here to say that? The sickness is Dad's fault. Don't tell me you came here expecting me to take care of him." Instead of expressing sadness about her father's illness, she seemed more concerned about avoiding any inconvenience to herself. It was my first time seeing a daughter look down on her father, who didn't choose to get sick, and I felt embarrassed for her as a fellow human being. My anger peaked, and even my parents, who had planned to talk calmly, were getting worn down. "That's too much. You're his daughter, aren't you? Even though a loved one is suffering, you can be so indifferent? If the roles were reversed, you would definitely be upset." I thought she would reflect a bit on what I said and quiet down, but I underestimated her. "Don't talk nonsense! There's no rule that says I have to look after him because I'm his daughter. If you're so concerned about it, why don't you do it? Joseph is his child, just like I am." Indeed, my husband Joseph is also father-in-law's child, and it's not right to put the responsibility on sister-in-law alone. Because she's so irresponsible, I thought she should step up and take care of father-in-law at a time like this. But people like her are good at justifying their behavior. What she said wasn't wrong, and I figured it was futile to argue any further, so I dropped it. Although we were reluctant to leave father-in-law to sister-in-law, who clearly didn't want to deal with this, we, as a working couple, didn't have the time, unlike sister-in-law, who was a housewife. If Joseph had to quit his job, it would be better for our finances if I quit mine, but I found fulfillment in my current job. As I was considering my options, sister-in-law revealed her trump card with a triumphant look on her face. "By the way, Charlotte, you have a nursing certification, don't you? You know more than an amateur like me. I think you should be the one to take care of him. It's reassuring for the patient to have a professional take care of them, isn't it?" I had worked as a CNA in a nursing home 15 years ago, having earned a nursing certification so that I could take care of my parents if something happened, since I'm an only child. Knowing it would be futile to pursue sister-in-law any further, we decided to go home and think things over. "I'm sorry you have such an unfeeling and troublesome sister-in-law. She's not the type to reflect on herself, even if I said something, so I couldn't say anything." "No, it's okay. I knew that no matter what you said, it wouldn't change anything. It's not your fault, Joseph." "What should we do? I can tell you love your job, and I would feel bad taking that away from you just because my dad got sick. But even in a situation like this, it made me happy to see Joseph thinking so much about me. But unlike sister-in-law, I'm not heartless. I wanted to cherish every minute of father-in-law's life. It's okay, don't worry about me. I can figure out my job situation later. The most important thing is I met you, thanks to your dad, so I want to express my gratitude." Holding Joseph's hand, I saw his eyes welling up with regret. Let's face this together. Seeing Joseph's expression lighten a bit, I geared up to tackle the bigger problem. The biggest issue here is money, isn't it? While chatting with Joseph, it turned out that my father-in-law had only signed up for the cheapest insurance available. That meant the guaranteed expenses would be minimal, and we'd have to pay out of pocket for necessities. "Well, his daughters definitely won't offer to chip in," he said. "And they should be contributing more if they're not going to help take care of him." Their lack of dependability was disheartening, even though I hadn't expected much to begin with. Caring for a sick person requires mustering up your own motivation when it's at rock bottom. It's not an easy task. It was a battle against myself. The next day, I decided to step away from my work in the bar kitchen, where I'd enjoyed the camaraderie and hard work alongside the younger staff. When I explained the situation, everyone was understanding, though their disappointment at my leaving was palpable. "Please come back when you can," they said. Those words gave me strength and became my motivation for what lay ahead. With that, I headed straight to the hospital where father-in-law was waiting. Arriving at the hospital, I saw father-in-law from behind, quietly facing away from the entrance. I couldn't tell if he was staring out the window or sleeping, but his loneliness and sadness were palpable, and I couldn't find the words to speak just yet. After about 30 seconds, I took a deep breath and walked closer to father-in-law. As I tried to figure out what to say and how to say it, father-in-law spoke first. "Charlotte, thank you for coming. I'm sorry to be such a burden." His face softened as he greeted me, but quickly his eyes filled with worry, and his expression darkened. He was so considerate, despite his illness, and it angered me that his own daughter, sister-in-law, couldn't bother to be here. "Please, let me know if there's anything I can do for you." I knew I couldn't understand the pain of his illness, but I wanted to support him as best as I could. Once I'd finished my morning chores, I'd take a 40-minute journey to the hospital each day. I'd always driven to work, but now I opted for the bus to maximize my time with father-in-law, even if it meant cutting into my sleep. The bus rides were soothing, providing a brief respite and rejuvenation for the challenging days ahead. As I watched father-in-law's vitality diminish day by day, I devoted my heart and energy to making him comfortable. The medical procedures, including IVs and medication, were necessary, but not simple. Unlike a routine IV for a cold, a catheter had to be placed near his heart via a surgical incision below his collarbone. The sight was distressing, but it was the best we could do for a father-in-law who wasn't a candidate for surgery. "Try this," I offered, handing him a Walkman. Father-in-law loved karaoke and had even won local competitions with his amazing voice. He used to practice daily by singing along to his CD player, but his hospitalization had put an end to that. Wanting him to keep his passion for music alive, I loaded his favorite songs onto the Walkman as a gift. He immediately put on the headphones and pressed play. His face instantly brightened. "I thought I wouldn't be able to listen to music anymore. Thank you so much. Now I have to win another karaoke competition when I get discharged." Seeing father-in-law smile, I felt a bit relieved. Even amidst the unfamiliar hospital atmosphere and daily tough treatments, father-in-law never complained. In fact, he was more worried about me. "Sorry for causing you trouble and expenses. I wish we had traveled more with you and Joseph. I've always wanted to go to that place." Then he took out his mobile phone and showed me a picture. There, countless lavender flowers were blooming in all directions. "Wow, that's beautiful. This place used to be nothing but fields, but after urban development, it turned into such a beautiful spot. This flower is my favorite." Seeing father-in-law's eyes sparkling, I wanted him to get better even more urgently. From then on, I decided to stop by a florist before going to the hospital for father-in-law, who loved flowers. "After you left, I felt lonely, but having flowers around changes things. I found myself talking to the flowers, and the nurses looked at me like I was strange." We had a good laugh over this. 2 weeks later, a feeding tube was attached to father-in-law, who had been eating normally until then. You could visibly see his body turning more yellow. His voice, calling my name, lost its energy. I had to suppress my fear and act strong, which was tough. I hadn't expected him to become bedridden in just 2 weeks after the cancer diagnosis. I was painfully aware of the dreadfulness of the disease. I wanted to say, "Stay strong, Dad," but I knew he would be the most frustrated. He probably didn't want to admit that he was weak, and would be blaming his body for not listening to him. His smile, showing strength at times, was a saving grace for me. I would often excuse myself to the restroom, unable to hold back my tears. I'd wash my face with cold water to cool my flushed face, and then return to his room. Joseph also spent some quality father-son time with him, during his breaks or on his days off. I would enjoy some quiet time alone at a cafe in the hospital during those moments. Father-in-law, who was always kind to me, seemed even happier when talking with his son. So I decided to give them as much time together as possible. An hour later, when I returned to the room, the two were discussing insurance money. "I want my modest insurance money to go to Charlotte, who's taking great care of me," father-in-law said, turning towards me. He had changed the beneficiary to ensure that I would get the money in case something happened to him. That's when the hospital room door flung open with a bang, and sister-in-law stormed in, hurling abuse. "I heard your conversation! Why did you change the beneficiary to her? It used to be me. Change it back, immediately, or I'll spread the word that you're the worst father ever. Both Joseph and I couldn't believe the childish words she was saying. However, to our surprise, father-in-law defended sister-in-law. All right, I got it. If you feel so strongly about it, I'll change the beneficiary back to you. But in return, promise me you'll stop saying hurtful things to Charlotte. She's the wife of my beloved son, Joseph. I won't tolerate her getting hurt, no matter what happens. Perhaps sister-in-law really loved money, to the point of obsessing over it. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that's all she thought about. Once the father-in-law said that, the sister-in-law nodded quietly and left the hospital room. I wanted to follow her out of disbelief, but was stopped by my husband and the father-in-law. So I reluctantly sat down on a chair in the room. However, I couldn't help but notice something off about their behaviors, leaving me with a big question mark floating in my mind. Hey, why are you guys laughing? In response to my question, my father-in-law began to explain the truth between chuckles. That silly girl really believed all my assets were tied up in insurance and went home. Your plan worked well, Dad. Then my father-in-law took out 3 bank cards from a locked drawer and handed them to me. He told me they held a fortune beyond my wildest imagination, which left me speechless with surprise. I knew the father-in-law was wealthy, but a new question popped up in my mind. Why was he only enrolled in a single minimal insurance plan? However, it was a decent plan that would give him $10 million in the event of his death. All my assets are on these cards. I know I don't have much time left, so I want you two to use it. I'm sorry for all the expenses I put you through, with my hospital bills, flowers, and clothes. No. The money we spent isn't a big deal at all. We can't accept such a huge sum. It would feel like a punishment. Just take it as a token of gratitude for taking care of me. And remember, keep this a secret from her. It seemed that just like us, the father-in-law didn't think highly of the sister-in-law due to her selfish behavior and lack of family consideration. That's why we had decided to leave her only the bare minimum if anything happened to him. Won't you accept my offer? Faced with their earnest gazes, I found it hard to refuse. I felt guilty, but agreed, nonetheless. 2 weeks later, in accordance with the father-in-law's wish to spend his remaining time in a more home-like environment, receiving palliative care, we moved him to a hospice. We contacted the sister-in-law just in case, but her only response was a curt, "Good for you." It was truly an eye-rolling moment. Despite the sister-in-law's absence, the warm conversation between the 3 of us continued. I'm sorry for causing you trouble with my secret, but there's one more thing. Did you know my father was Martino Aaron? What? You mean the famous singer? I've seen him on the hit nostalgia song show. Are you serious? That's news to me. This was big news. Even Joseph didn't know. Apparently, it was not public knowledge that the father-in-law was Martino Aaron's son. He was a secret child, and because Martino Aaron was a public figure, it was kept under wraps. However, Martino Aaron apparently doted on the father-in-law behind the scenes and shared his wealth with him before he passed away. When I'm gone, go here. Saying that, the father-in-law handed us a piece of paper. It only had an address written on it, and we had no idea what it was about. He kept evading our questions for more details. A month later, after living his final days at the hospice, the father-in-law peacefully passed away. Father-in-law, I sobbed, calling for him one more time, but there was no answer. Gratitude welled up in me for how he had always treated me like his own daughter, and tears streamed down my face like a waterfall. As we stood by father-in-law's side, leaning on Joseph for support, we watched the doctor and nurses do their work. At the funeral, sister-in-law arrived and began crying loudly. A stark contrast to the attitude she had shown us previously. She was talking to the attendees as though she cared deeply for her father. I wanted to tell everyone that all sister-in-law wanted was money, but doing so wouldn't make father-in-law happy. So I decided to think of sister-in-law as a stranger, which somewhat eased my mind. Of course, after the funeral, sister-in-law didn't interfere with us, and we didn't bother with her either. A week after father-in-law's passing, Joseph and I headed to the location written on the piece of paper father-in-law had given us. The sight that met us was astonishing. "What is this?" Both Joseph's and my voices overlapped. Before us stood an enormous, opulent mansion like nothing we'd ever seen before. Unsure of how to proceed, we decided to walk around the vast gardens first. A woman emerged from the house, and I was so surprised I fell backwards. I'm sorry, I didn't think anyone was here." The woman in front of us wore a kind smile as she invited us into the house. The interior was so extravagant, with marble, diamonds, and ornate decorations. It felt like we had stepped into a dream. The woman guided us to a room with plush chairs where we sat down. As I hurried to understand the reality of the situation, the woman began to speak slowly. "I've been the caretaker of this house. Your father owned this place and used it to entertain his friends from time to time. Every time someone would visit, I would come to assist. However, there's no longer a need for me to come here. Your father's final wish was to hand over the ownership of this house to you, Joseph and Charlotte." After saying this, she handed us a set of keys, a map of the house, and a notebook detailing the location of various valuables. She added, "I'm glad to have met the people your father treasured the most. I wish you happiness." After these words, she left. 2 hours of investigating later, we found a letter from father-in-law in a desk drawer in the study. The letter stated that we could live in or sell the house as we wished. There was no way for us to express our gratitude to father-in-law, who left us not only a fortune, but also this grand mansion, as he was no longer with us. All we could do was continue living in this world, for father-in-law's sake. The following month, we decided to go to a hotel father-in-law had wanted to visit for 15 years. On our way, we played father-in-law's favorite music and spoke to a photo of him. "Father-in-law, we're finally going on a trip together. Let's have a blast today," I said. Suddenly, a leaf fell and stuck to our car window, shaking lightly. It felt like father-in-law had answered us, which made me happy. 3 hours later, we arrived at the historic hotel father-in-law had spoken of, nestled in a quiet spot surrounded by peaceful nature. Photos of several past presidents adorned the walls of the hotel, signifying its recognition and importance. After we were shown to our spacious room, we sat down on the sofa, savoring the welcome drinks and fresh fruits. "It's been a while since we've been able to enjoy a leisurely trip like this." "Yeah, well, Dad's with us today." It had been a long time since Joseph and I had shared a look, and I couldn't help but feel a bit embarrassed. After enjoying the spa and exploring the hotel, it was finally time for the meal we were looking forward to. Since we had ordered meals for 3, the room service staff who brought it to our room was quite surprised. When we explained the situation, they nodded in understanding, with a kind smile. After talking about my father-in-law for a while, they even offered us a bottle of wine on the house. This is delicious! Just what Dad would say," I mused. Being an infrequent drinker, I got tipsy that day, until my memory blurred. However, my husband Joseph, who was good with alcohol, remembered my actions and told me about them the next morning. "Last night, you kept stroking Dad's picture and saying, 'I love you.' I can count on one hand the number of times you've said that to me. I was a bit envious of Dad," he said, laughing. We shared this humorous anecdote as we drove along a different route than the day before. "Oh, here!" There, lavender was blooming as far as the eye could see. There was no mistake. This was the place my father-in-law had shown us in the photo. Embraced by the gentleness of the lavender color, I felt invigorated, not just entrapped in sadness, but eager to face forward. Dad told me once that Mom used to gaze at the lavender a lot before she passed away. Realizing that my father-in-law had brought us here out of love for his wife touched my heart deeply. Since then, we've started bringing lavender to the grave. The lavender has become a precious flower for our family, warming our hearts and bodies. Once we returned to our normal lives, we started spending our weekends in the luxurious house my father-in-law left us. Thanks to this, every week felt like a vacation. My love for Joseph deepened, and my gratitude to my father-in-law overflowed. I can't count how many times I wet my clothes with tears of joy. Fast forward a month later. It was a weekday around 7 p.m. After Joseph came home and took a bath, I was preparing dinner when the doorbell rang. When I checked the monitor, I saw my sister-in-law. She rarely comes to our house. I wanted to pretend we weren't home, but with Joseph's car in the driveway and the lights on, that wasn't possible. As I was hesitating, the impatient sister-in-law began to pound on the door. Worried about the neighbor's eyes, I turned off the stove and hurried to the door. As soon as I opened the door, my sister-in-law started yelling before the door fully closed. "Where the hell are you two on the weekend?" It seems she came to our house over the weekend, but Joseph and I were not there. I couldn't tell her why, so I remained silent, while she glared at me threateningly. All right, come this way." I didn't want her lingering at the front door, so I led her to the living room, intending to let Joseph handle her. Just then, Joseph, fresh from his bath, came to the entrance, and I sighed in relief. "Sis, what brings you here around dinner time?" I appreciated Joseph's forthright approach as I watched the two of them. He led her to the living room, and the conversation continued. "I came to light incense for Dad at the family altar over the weekend, but you two were nowhere to be found." Her self-righteous tone still irked me. Then, out of the blue, Joseph dropped a bombshell. "I actually spend my weekends dating Charlotte, trying to pass on all the love that Dad gave me. Sorry if this doesn't sit well with you. A sister who has to deal with her husband being lovey-dovey with another woman." My voice and sister-in-law's overlapped in shock. "What?" Sister-in-law was visibly shaken by this unexpected revelation. "There's no way! What are you talking about? There's no way he could be interested in any other woman but me!" Immediately after, Joseph took out his mobile phone from his pocket and showed a picture to sister-in-law. Curiosity piqued. I peeked at the photo, and sure enough, it was sister-in-law's husband, arm in arm with another woman. Sister-in-law's fury and sadness reached a peak, and she seemed to stop caring about me and Joseph. As soon as she got the picture forwarded from Joseph, she stormed off. The next day and the day after, when I asked Joseph, who didn't talk about sister-in-law, what happened to the couple, he said he didn't know because he had blocked sister-in-law's contact. "I don't consider her a sibling anymore. All I want is to live a peaceful daily life with you." Fast forward a month. While out shopping with Joseph as usual, we bumped into a neighbor from where sister-in-law lived. Apparently, the sister-in-law couple was in the midst of divorce discussions, with the husband completely out of love with sister-in-law, and a reluctant sister-in-law still not wanting to split, despite the infidelity. As much as it sounds like a tough situation, I've decided to stop worrying about sister-in-law and just focus on living my own life. As long as I have Joseph, I have nothing to fear. Father-in-law always used to say, the key to happiness is to laugh a lot and sing out loud. I'm going to go back to my old job soon, but I plan on adhering to father-in-law's advice and enjoying life to the fullest, even for father-in-law's sake. Joseph and I both love to sing, and we've promised to participate in a karaoke competition together. Our goal? To make it to the same podium that father-in-law did, to reach the top. As we let our singing voices resonate towards the heavens,